Then let me pull up the agenda. We got a few points on the agenda today. Hello everyone. Today is our OIG Roundtable edition number 8. Today is October 24th, and today's agenda is a little bit longer than the last one. Getting into updates and backlog of the past 2 weeks, we have the following to report. The WAX blockchain repository on GitHub has been updated after we kindly asked the WAX team to do so. So now any relevant version is tagged and released. So this should make things much easier in the future. Next thing on the agenda is the price oracle upgrade we are performing now. The background is we want to have USDT and USDC pairs on chain. We have concluded this on testnet on the contract Delphi oracle. Inside the contract table pairs, you can view the active pairs for now. USDC, USD, and USDT, USD is now active on testnet. We are working on bringing it to mainnet. It will be announced, and you guys need to vote for it then on mainnet. Make sure to do it and make sure to adjust your price oracles in time. We will surely announce that we require those parts in the near future. Next on the agenda is an update we received from the WAX team, because they're working effortlessly to onboard new people onto WAX, and our newest addition to the ecosystem is can be found inside the developer documentation. What we actually have now is a WalletConnect integration with the WAX testnet, which is nice. So you can now integrate your WAX Cloud Wallet into existing WalletConnect integrations. I'm sure this will help with onboarding new people and having the cloud wallet used. It's not possible for self-custodial wallets, only for the WAX Cloud Wallet. There's 3 pages about how to set it up, a developer guide, and how to link your wallet with the WAX blockchain. You can read the details in the developer documentation under My Cloud Wallet, WalletConnect. There's all the content to this. Okay, next on the agenda, we are looking at the network health as usual. Let's start with our block producer reliability tracker, sponsored by Aloha EOS. Looking back at the past month, we see that we had some issues with some rounds missed. Overall, we're doing pretty fine, except a minor incident EOSphere had with, I think, internet connection going down. We had in the past days also Bounty Block losing a few rounds. It seems that the node was disconnected from the internet. I'm not sure. But thanks for announcing the incident. Of course, we will look at it carefully. But yeah, summed up, overall, pretty reliable network at the moment. We are also looking at the network monitoring provided by EOS Nation, where they scrape all the logs and build those beautiful graphs for us. But this time, not much we need to talk about. The situation in the network has normalized in the past 30 days. We have no low transaction rate, no unusual low transaction rate anymore. Block times look stable. Not many empty blocks per round, which is a very good thing. And also a pretty stable, I think, CPU consumption across all guilds and all blocks. Nothing more noteworthy here. Looking at the past validations for the current tech snapshot time frame, we can also see that the network is doing pretty good. we had an incident a few weeks ago with Hyperions missing out blocks because of a strange transaction, but that has resolved. And as we see, this is only one reference, a validation core. We can see that most of the guilds perform pretty well in the TechOps criteria these days. Atomic Assets API, I'm not sure when we had an issue with this one in the past, because it seems to be pretty stable API at the moment. Unfortunately, we had one guild resign in the past week. Token Gamer is still going to be active on Wax, but they just told us that they're going to shut down their producer. I guess it's a mix of infrastructure cost and missing points on product development for a stable position. Sad to see this, always sad to see this. But I think the door is not closed, so once the market improves a little bit, we welcome all guilds to just register again and resume operations on Wax. Right, next on the agenda, we have our big update for you, the big guideline update in version 5.3. And in this case, we call it 5.3, 5.4, because we are applying a lot of changes on those two new guidelines, namely the new bi-weekly cycle for tech evaluations. So going forward after this full evaluation at the end of which we are going to release at the end of the month, we are going to have tech evaluations of technical infrastructure every 2 weeks based on the past 2 weeks. So we want to shorten the time frame. We are looking at tech operations. We don't want any more overlapping technical operations timeframes. So when we validate, so when you have an issue, this issue doesn't, or an incident, this issue and incident doesn't carry over to the next technical evaluation. So this is a big change, a huge change to the guidelines, which we are transitioning to now. As of the product and ecosystem contributions, so the reports you are filing on GitHub, those timeframes don't change for you. It's every 6 weeks. It's alternating between the 15th and the end of the month. There might be adjustments to those timeframes in the future, but for now, you don't have to adjust anything. So we are awaiting your next report on the 30th of November. Right, visualizing those new changes, and since we are in the middle of an evaluation right now, I can guide you once through the relevant changes inside the requirements we are putting out, except of moving those 2 points to secondary requirements. So you need to be part of the Keybase team and you need to have emergency contact information. One significant change is happening with the next tech evaluation, which is we require you to have a working chain API, and it must be publicly available. This is indeed the case for all of the guilds. In some cases, the tracking might fail, and in some other cases, there are some minor issues with Chain API. But overall, and we are just taking into consideration the uptime for now and no further details, all of the guild except of 3 are passing those requirements. This requirement also is now part of the new TechOps evaluation we are doing. So the score table, and this is just a preliminary example of how the next tech score is going to look like inside the table. The table is being extended with another row, Chain API. We require an SLR or an uptime of over 75% for the evaluation period, but expect us to tighten this requirement as soon as we have the validations and the monitoring for those APIs up and online across all validators. Another huge change is, since we added the chain API and we expect everyone to be able to get those points, we are turning down the multiplier to 12 for technical operations. In total, it doesn't impact the tech ops score too much, but we want to emphasize a well-running tech ops across all guilds. So the multiplier is changed from 13.25 to 12. This goes hand in hand with an adjustment. No, that's it. Where the link to this? Yes, Douglas, I will post the link to the new guidelines in the chat in a few seconds. Other changes we are having inside the table, not for now, but those two things are the biggest changes we are releasing with 5.3 right now. We are rolling out with 5.3 right now. In case you missed it, you can view the version guidelines, which are finalized now, 5.3. You can view them in the usual place on Notion under version guidelines. Some other noteworthy changes will require some versions for APIs. Atomic Assets API shall be run with the most current version right now, which is updated in end of August, I think. Hyperion as a requirement with the most current version 3.3.9. So thanks for the feedback on the last call. We adjusted this from 3.3.5 to 3.3.9. And the Delphi price oracle now has a clarification for the uptime. So make sure your Delphi oracle is running and is feeding the correct prices, and 90%, 95% SLR for the tech evaluation period. Also, as we discussed in the past roundtable, we didn't make any further adjustments to this. We are standing by the grace period for ecosystem-wide incidents. And starting with 5.3, and this is our last full evaluation happening right now, we are going to have tech evaluations every 14 days. As I just mentioned, the tech evaluations are going to happen every Tuesday.
Please. Now, the scores will be announced end of Tuesday.
Exactly. The scores will be announced at the end of Tuesday, so it's a fixed date. We have no more fixed appeal periods for this tech evaluation. We have, however, the case that you might appeal for a wrong score and we might correct it. I'm sure Kiefer can get more into details for this.
If we have obvious errors and this is apparent, we will be able to update the scores on chain. But we will only do this like with the previous appeal periods within the first 1 to 3 days. And only if it's an obvious error on our end. Right. Everything else, validation errors, is up to making sure your stuff is properly tracked on the validation sites, and just check it. Take 5 minutes once, twice a week. Just have one look at the 3 major validations and you should be good.
Wonderful. So just make sure that after we publish the scores, you revisit the scores, you look at your table, and if any apparent mistake was made, just inform us, please. I'm sure we'll get the hang on it while we are transitioning to this new bi-weekly cycle. And of course, some minor wording changes. I will not repeat them right now, but feel free to visit the version guidelines and have a look at them. Okay, so that's for 5.3. We are in the process of announcing 5.4. We are undecided about the changes that are going to happen inside 5.4, or if it will be an extended 5.3. But in case you find anything in 5.3 you really don't like or you want to discuss with us, take your time, book a call with us, and convince us that we need to change something, or any feedback always is appreciated on the guidelines. And it's sometimes it's just disheartening to see that we ask like 35 or 36 guilds for feedback on a GitHub discussion, and it's the usual suspects that hand back good feedback. I'm pretty sure you are all not uninterested, but when we ask you for feedback, it would be really great to at least get some thumb up or thumb down if you like it or don't. Just some sort of feedback. Get engaged, because at the end we make the rules for you, and you guys should engage with us to have those rules that you really like, and have those rules removed that you guys don't really like. So rally for what you really want inside the guidelines. All right, enough for the guidelines now, because I'm not sure who asked for, but we wanted to look at the nice example for a guild submission. And one thing that comes to mind is just a guild that has been around for, I think since January. They have been on Wax. It's Decouple. It's a team from Italy. And they quickly got the sense of what we expect inside the report. So I want to walk you through how they do it, and that's a good example on how you should do it. So besides some basic information we are asking for, we are asking always for information that submit technical operations. We have asked you in the past for metrics around your API usage, but regardless, it's always nice to see those stats inside any report that's happening. Of course, when incidents are happening, those need to be reported inside your report. On to the next one, we have the product development we are asking you for. So the structure is pretty nice. We have the products according to the product score sheet and the ecosystem score sheet on the guild rating, on the guild page on Notion. So the first product is Taco Utility App, the second product, and then what they do is they simply list the period for the stats, the link, which is nice. You can just click it and have a look yourself if anything is updated. And then also, of course, the product updates that have happened in the past 6 weeks, which is just a summary of what has been done, which in this case shows that some effort has been put into the maintenance and development of the product, and that's for us a good sign to not decay a product, or potentially also increase the score of a product if we think that the feature is impactful for a better score. And that goes on with product 3, product 4, product 5, and this essentially repeats whatever we have inside the guild report defined as product and ecosystem contributions. And then, of course, next part, the ecosystem contributions, this is part of the product contributions, the community tools. And right after that, the ecosystem contributions, which are then often accompanied by a screenshot showcasing what has happened or the marketing material used in this case, which is just nice to see. And of course, some further details around services and other community tools that have been built. If you're running a Discord, include the stats. If you are active on Twitter and engage with users, we also like to see this. Instagram, any social basically. And at the end, and this is also pretty important for us, we ask you for some feedback. So whatever you have experienced in the past 6 weeks, or whatever you didn't like, or if you have any feedback for the roundtable, please use this last part and hand some feedback back to us. And that way we can know where and how to improve. So concluding, that's a pretty slick report. The title is perfect. It is actually a markdown file. It has the correct date. That's how it should be done. You can find it inside the WAG skills repository in pull requests. That's where we receive all our reports, and then it's here. Right. On to the next one, and this is a tricky one, I suppose. So with 5.3 and 5.4, we are introducing the monitoring of Chain API. We haven't done it in the past, or it has been a factor when reviewing history solutions, but now we want to separate it. We truly believe that Chain API is the most vital component of our ecosystem. It enables users and wallets to connect to the blockchain. It enables developers and dApps to read tables from chain, receive those. So we want that key component to be working really well. We want to have insanely fast get table rows requests, for example, and we also want to make sure that whatever guild is being used has a working API node to connect wallets and to just request data from the blockchain. Since those criteria are new, we have gone beyond and listed some of the endpoints we want to make sure to be reachable and to be just working. This is mainly used for connecting wallet nodes and also pushing transactions, but get table rows is missing in this one.
Yeah, what's the 47? What's that?
Yeah, that's I'm not sure, a typo, but I just corrected it to get table rows. So push transaction, essential for pushing any transaction, get table rows, just to read the chain, get required keys, potentially for wallets, get ABI. It's pretty handy when working with the new WharfKit SDK, contract SDK. Get block and get account and get info. There's no way around of providing those for basic functionality of the chain. So this is what we're looking for our validators to be validating in the near future, and we want to make sure that those calls are working. We will get into questions right after the agenda, and we will be discussing this topic. So hold on for a second, please. Of course, with a version requirement, we can't really test this on API nodes, but once we get push transactions 2, I think, we will see a difference because it is enabled only in 404 in VAX version 4, for example. Also get transaction status. Whatever the chain API is holding and whatever new feature we are introducing into the network, we will start monitoring it at some point. Our current fallback is if those endpoints aren't monitored by the current set of validators we have, and the set of validators is just limited at the moment, we will start now with a basic check of uptimes. And this often is just checking if a get info request is going through, if a block can be received. In this case, unfortunately, not. If currency balances for a certain wallet can be fetched. And that's then under wallet node, if key accounts can be fetched, accounts by authorizers can be fetched. So all those details and the other details we listed here will get fully monitored in the coming weeks. We can't give out an estimate of when it will happen, but you heard it today. So please prepare and find some way to monitor and test your own APIs to make sure that those endpoints are always reachable. There are, however, some uncertainties, and that's where we will transition into the open discussion for now, I think, with API nodes, where we will ask you now for your feedback. So, long story short, on 50% of the guilds, the endpoint get block reports on the EOS Nation validator that there is an invalid block 1. That's something that can potentially break your get block validation. The next thing we are observing regularly, maybe not on this scale, on this scale too. No, this is for Hyperion. We are still seeing occasional errors involving cores on the APIs. So your APIs then can't be used by wallets and can't be used by websites connecting directly. Looking at another example, because this guild has been failing the chain API checks recently. Let's see what else potentially can fail your chain APIs. Retrieving a large block. So this is a configuration error, or let's call it a configuration mistake on the API node itself, where the API serializer doesn't have enough time to get this block, serialize it, and deserialize it, and send it back.
That's one reason. The other reason is it just doesn't have the block, which if it doesn't have block 1, probably doesn't have that's an old block. So
right.
It's valid that it may not be able to deserialize it. That's what it's testing. But it will also fail that test if it just doesn't simply have the block, because it also fails to deserialize it.
Right, but those two errors are like separate. So the one is the invalid block 1, when the block number 1 is not present. The other one is on a random block number in between, where the block is just too big to get.
It's not a random block number. It's a specific block number that's exceptionally packed with transactions. They're hand-picked.
Okay.
And but it's old. So if you don't have old full API logs for your API, it'll just fail that error. With that you can have serialization through the roof. If you don't have the block, it also fails the test. So it could be two causes, that or just missing the block,
or being overloaded. So it's a third cause also. It can time out if it has too many requests at that time.
If the request times out to just get the block, that's right. I mean, it's a failure of the request, an assumption that, hey, if that request failed, it's probably a deserialization problem, if none of the other tests failed too. But knowing that there's no block 1, you've got a good assumption. He's just running a truncated API server. It doesn't have a full block log, which is fine for 95% of API functionality. But I've personally run into that before. You'll fail it. You can set that setting through the roof. It's never going to pass because you don't have the block, or your API is getting smashed into oblivion and just refuses to accept it.
Okay. So I think I'm going to ask you 1, 2, 3 questions, and I also like you to raise hands to answer this. What's the cause for an invalid block 1 reported, and why are there APIs without the first block and many APIs with the first block?
Well, but it's because they don't have a full blocks log.
Right.
Yeah,
they're on full nodes.
Right. They either launched using a snapshot, they're using log trimming, whatever. But if you ask that node at the API level, or even peer-to-peer, for the first block of the chain, second block, whatever, it doesn't have it. Therefore, a get block for block 1 fails because you don't have the first one.
There are 4 API requests that actually use the blocks log, right? If one of them is get block. So get block, it can only get the block from what's actually in the blocks log. If it's missing the beginning bit or whichever bit, it won't be able to find. Get raw block, get block header state, and get block info. All of those 4 require a blocks.log file that has got the relevant block information inside of it.
Okay, thank you for this bit of information. What's the drawback for us when we are looking at Chain API when we don't have the full blocks log? Keep in mind that we want in the near future, so this is very undecided, but we want to somehow enrich the guidelines with having a working seed environment. So at some point we might oblige everyone to have a working seed node. Does that have any impact on someone trying to seed from you or something? Does it have any impact on Chain API?
The main one is the get block.
It's only the get block.
That's the main one. Yeah. But
well, I guess I'll go in.
Let's go with raise hands again. But Ross, yes, you were. It's your turn.
The get block is a main one. People want to find out what occurred in a specific block, right? What transaction was in a specific block. If you do a get block, it gives you all that data, right? I can see people are using it on our nodes. People actually do run a get block. If they don't have it on their API, then maybe they didn't have it on their seed node either. Just put it out there. Of course, those are two different things. So, yeah.
But the point is that people rarely query first or second or third or 100,000 block. Usually they just query the recent history from blocks.
Yeah, sure, usually, but they do query it though, right? So I suppose it just comes down to this. Do you require a full node or not?
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, the technical requirements are really boiled down to space. I mean, and of course the load that you'll take from, if you have get blocks, people that are looking for them will ask for them and they're heavy. It's getting a lot better, but it's really the difference between whether you manage the, what is it, a 1.5 terabyte block log now? I forgot what it's gotten up to, but state history is astronomical through the roof. But the only difference between a partial API and a full API, for the most part, tends to be whether you have a truncated API block log or just have it from the beginning. Either have synced it or
full block log. I think the full block log is 3 terabytes at the moment.
And maybe 3 terabytes.
It's
yeah.
3 and 6 terabytes to be precise.
Yeah.
And,
I don't know. I just keep throwing bigger hard drives.
And state history is 8 terabytes.
Correct.
So I just saw that Eosphere, for example, is having full block log. Nefty is having full block log. It seems. So you guys have the full block log. Most of the other.
I got a question about that.
Again, please, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, we have the full blocks log on our state history node. Is this just a question of forwarding this request, or why do we need this on every API node?
I can say you should not run your API request to your state history node. There's a couple different reasons for not doing that. I mean, you can, but there's reasons to not do that. But copy that full block log to your API node and offer it the exact same way you offer it. That's a better solution.
Yeah, but we talked about space, right? So it's 3.6 terabyte?
Yes.
That's correct. And it grows, I don't know, about 4 or 5 gig a day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basil has raised hand. Hello.
Yeah. Also, hello, everyone. Also, I think we have full block log for EOS Arabia for testnet and many.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that you do not have to actually believe this report from the surface point, because sometimes when you introduce, for example, IPFS or other unrecognizable API type, it won't report that you have full blocks. We have full blocks, but we have API, light API and IPFS in our block BP JSON. And this validator does not report that we have full block, but because it doesn't recognize those two types of API. I asked Matthew to actually address this kind of problem. It's I thought it's simple, but I guess they are busy with other stuff than upgrading this validator.
Isn't it kind of an overkill? I mean, for the most part, the API nodes is for sending transactions, getting account data, and all that kind of stuff. And get block requests seem to be very rare. And just for that, having all the API nodes, I mean, we have several, I think 5 now, to require block log there is, seems a bit of an overkill.
Okay, so let me draw the following conclusion then. On API nodes, this HTTP request would fail for the block one. But if you provide an actual seed node which is full and is another node, for example, I don't know, like your state history which is full, that node should be then, so the seed node should be full and the API node is in most cases not and shouldn't be full.
Shouldn't be is the wrong word.
Yeah.
It should be, but it's
Why is it
if you
not?
allow
Because
it.
it's 4 terabytes.
If you want to put the
literally,
requirement
it's 4
on it, then you need
terabytes.
to have a good reason. If you want to put it in, everyone has to have this, then you have to have a good reason, and this is not a good enough reason for everyone to do it. Because most of the data is to provide a chain API that people can use for the current state. That's what most people use it for. So that should be the requirement, and this should be something different that I believe is very useful and we should have. Everyone should probably have it, but it's not the same thing.
Here's a fun fact.
Right.
You can run even the wax block log off of a spinning disk, slow hard drive. You need to run your state and stuff out of your NVMe, but you can run it and it'll survive and doesn't kill them. But it's not like you need to spend $2,000 a month on renting this extra space. Actually, this big block log can survive with just a normal, cheap SATA drive.
I would actually counter this because I tried on full block on cheaper drives, and get table rows is really bad on this. So I wouldn't recommend if you plan to use full capability of your API in terms of
but that's from the state though. Yeah, that's pulling it from the state.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, related to the block data, state history and block log, for me personally, on the 50 servers that we run, work pretty well with even Wax mainnet, so you can handle these. I mean, you can run a solid state drive, and it's obviously better. Those aren't even.
for state history, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are nearing down on API nodes shouldn't be obliged to be full, or there should be no point impact on API nodes not being full or being full, but instead, for example, seed nodes should be connected to the full node to feed every block possible.
That's three different
I
things.
don't agree with that.
That's from practical perspective. Mostly, if you want to use, for example, seed node for full synchronization, that's really a good practical point to have full seed node. But full API node is not really practical. You don't.
It is practical.
Yeah.
How, Anders?
So the problem here is really the purpose of adding the chain API as a requirement. Why is that being done? And it's being done because most people need an easy way to get the current state of the blockchain. Their applications need to get table, and that should be the requirement. If you also want to have this as a requirement, which I think is a good thing, that all API should have full history. We have been arguing for that from the start. People should be able to get the history. That is not the same thing. That is a different category, a different reason for having the full history from having the an available chain API. That's two different things. And then we have the peering that has to have all information so people can replay the block. That is a different thing. They are not the same thing. There's 3 different topics and 3 different purposes.
I mean, from the perspective of getting first block, what is the practical side of that? I'm just trying to understand this because state
I can
of
give you an
change
example.
you can get from recent snapshot. It's not necessary
If you want to build an IBC relay node, you have to replay it through all the blocks, and it smashes through that API now. Doesn't require diffuse, doesn't require state history now. It will go one by one on the blocks. But if you want people to do that on the public APIs, you're going to need to have all those previous blocks available. Block 1, maybe not, but block 64 million, yeah, I mean...
Yeah, with that I agree.
Well, I mean, there's a detailed use case for why public APIs should have all of their blocks available,
but I mean,
considered fully functional. Because again, the difference is, are you maintaining the 4 terabyte file, or are you letting it auto rotate on a smaller drive?
Michael, what I'm trying to say that we just have to have determined practical depth of our block history. For example, most recent 50 million blocks, and that should be enough for most of the people. Not.
Yeah, but that's a different problem, a different situation. It's not the same.
One after another, please. So, Anders, I couldn't understand you. Sorry.
Yeah, but like Pavel is talking about a different thing. Most people don't need the full history, and that is true. And that's why I argue strongly that if you add a requirement for teams to do something, you have a purpose, and that purpose needs to be followed. And to have a full history, full block log, everything is very important to have as well. It's not the same thing. You need to be able to query the blockchain. The longer we go, the older blocks will be what we have today or what we had a year ago, and those should also be, you should be able to query them so you are able to actually get the information, because we don't know what people will need in the future. Perhaps they need the block where someone updated the ABI of a contract. Perhaps they need something where something happened, and then they need to, okay, what actually happened the block before that one and after, when they are looking for the history in the future. You need to be able to get this type of information.
Okay. So essentially, API nodes and the chain API validations we are doing are based on the most current state of the blockchain. That's the most focus we should be putting on validating chain API. And then this full block log story is a whole separate part, which if we were to validate it, would need to be validated completely separate.
Yes.
Okay, so that's one recommendation we are hearing right now. Okay. Anyone else?
Ben raised hand.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Ben, yes, please.
Yeah, I think that's kind of already answers my question. So, like I said before, most of the requests that we got in the API nodes are push transactions, get table rows, all this kinds of fun. And I think it has value in itself to provide those nodes, right? So that people can interact with the chain. So my question for the full block requirement, is this not something we should provide over the history nodes that we are offering? And should it not also be communicated like this so that people, if they use an API node, it's should not be used for get block specifically, but if they want to get blocks, they should look at history nodes that we have.
Okay, that's interesting because I think answering to that, the history solutions we are using right now don't support any kind of peering, for example.
Peering is a different thing than API.
Yeah, sure. But in case you want to have a working seed and to peer with someone and to be able to receive all blocks from Genesis, the current history solutions we are using are not providing this. So it's part of the what we call currently seed node. So this seed node, which is in the BP.json right now, should be the full node following following the discussion now, right?
Yeah, I think the seed node, it's a different story because we are offering more API nodes for for usage than we do seed nodes, and I think it's easier if we're saying yes, we need full seed nodes, then you can put those up more easily than.
The other thing is when you do a get block and you point it at the Hyperion, I think the Hyperion then points it back to your API node. Hyperion doesn't serve it; it just points it there. So it's actually not helping you.
Okay.
So if somebody wants a get block, they need to ultimately, whether it's via your load balancer with some routing, or it has to get to a node that's actually got a full block log somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So from what I understand, one critical part we should avoid is obliging chain API nodes that we are validating to be full. That's it. Unless you have a purpose for it. Yeah, sure. I think focusing just on the features we want to provide performant and very reliable. I think we can agree that having a full block log on the chain API isn't a necessity. Michael.
Then what would you define is the minimum requirement is the other answer to that? Can I run it with 2 block histories? Do I need 30 days? Do I need 6 months?
We have currently set for partial history to have at least 6 weeks of data.
Partial history, which is Hyperion, correct?
Yeah,
not block.
I would assume we would apply the same here, right?
So you'd have to define the minimum of it has to at least have 6 weeks. Is the other side of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm sure we are revisiting how chain APIs will get validated in the future and how the points are assembled into a score for chain API. Any more feedback on the chain API topic for now from your side?
Anders?
Anders, yeah. Sorry, I'm missing
it. Of course, I have more questions, of course, and opinions. I'm good at that. So the testing of APIs will really impact how the score will be for a guild. So for me, it's very interesting to know how frequent the API is tested, because if you, for some reason, fails on the second that they are testing you, you will be it will look like you are down until the next test. And if that for some reason, perhaps you were up all the time before, but not during that moment, and then you had a split second where something went off, and then perhaps that happens 2-3 times during a week, what will happen then? And also, the more frequent we push them to test us, and the more different validators we have, the more of our requests will just be for the validators to validate that we actually have the information. And that is also, so there's really 2 questions. How frequent is frequent enough? And how is it handled the problem where infrequent updates could potentially have a negative impact or a positive impact on guilds?
That's actually a good question. The one thing I want to ask you back is when you receive calls to the chain API, do you have an estimate of how many of those requests fail because they couldn't be served on your side, or the request was invalid, or whatever? Because let's pretend the validators are requesting valid data. There shouldn't be a downtime then, right? So essentially on chain API, there should be never a downtime, right?
Yeah, but there could be a random reason for that API to be down at that exact second. But in reality, you have 99.99% uptime, but just that second you miss, and then you have the window where it will look like you're down, but in reality you are not.
Okay, I get it.
You see, it's a theoretical problem, the testing APIs.
Yeah, so right now the intervals for testing are very irregular. They don't follow a schedule, like it's always the same hour, for example. It's in most cases or across all validators, taking into account S-Engine and validation core at most. The case is that those validations are performed many times a day, and then for this day, a score is assembled or an uptime score is assembled. So when your API is, so let's go with a 2-week cycle and we have 14 days and once an hour an update is happening. We are speaking of 336 validation calls on your API. Taking this times 95, we are at 319. So you would, out of the 336 validation calls you are receiving, 16 can fail. So what we can't do is draw the conclusion that an API has been down only that minute and it has been up in the next minute. So we need to find the middle ground between how often, that's essentially what you're asking for, how often is it tested and how regular is it tested, right? Okay, so random tests. Let's put random tests against regular tests once an hour. Kefar wants to speak.
Yeah. So what I would point out here is that each individual validation service has these regular requests. And what we look at is the best validation you have across the validators. So you would have to have the bad luck that these essentially random calls fail on all validators that are not happening at the same time in irregular intervals. So while this is unlikely, if it actually happens, it usually means you have an issue with your endpoint. If you have 3 validation services and you fail on all 3 of them for enough random validations, this means there is definitely an issue. If it was just one validation service, I would agree. This could be at odds, this could be a fluke, but with 3 validation services that cancel each other out, I think we have a good coverage.
I would believe so, as long as the percent required uptime is reasonable, and 95% is very reasonable.
It's very reasonable, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
It's potentially too reasonable, but yeah.
It's like 16 hours out of 14 days.
Yeah, you can, exactly. I wrote that post 2 weeks ago with no comments on GitHub discussion of this exact situation. But essentially you can have the Oracle, for example, can be down for 16.8 hours per 2 weeks and you still get full points for it. And that's, I don't know. And the API, if you build a service and you rely on APIs that have 16 hours downtime every 2 weeks, it sounds crazy. But yes. I don't know if it should be more harder, because then for what purpose and everything.
Well, the Oracle is also not dependent upon one. It's designed to have that resiliency. So, I mean, it's not as impactful as if your one feed does break for 16 hours, as long as nobody else's breaks for those same 16 hours. Although that is an issue. When CoinGecko or their APIs crash, it takes out
too many
of us.
Too many services rely on the same data. So, but this is also just the issue of not having enough data points. Because where can you get the information? We only have one really valid market. What I highly recommend, I told this to others, don't just pull from CoinGecko, don't just pull from Binance. Use the WAX e-pair we have divided by 1000 and you have a very reliable price for WAX P.
And other exchanges randomly drop pairs as well. We had Huobi for a long time as the provider, and they randomly dropped a WAX ETH, for example.
Yeah, we used multiple, and then we took an average or a median, and we looked at that, and one of them was off, so it messed everything up for us before as well.
Oh, shit.
So we stopped.
Okay. Another question to ask is regarding the 95% uptime, which translates into 16.8 hours. Will you guys be able to perform maintenance and upgrades on your servers within this downtime frame?
Failovers?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
for the most part, what I'd say is much more likely is it taking 16 hours to detect and then figure out what the issue is, right? I mean, it was all working until it's not. Now you're balls deep in JavaScript, tearing through, trying to figure out why a JSON responds, because Hubai decided on the 13th of the month they were going to delist your pair. So, I mean, you got to have a balance, but downtime, nah, you're just smashing API calls. Hell, I can smash EOS Sweden's APIs with my calls, or copy the script to another server if you really wanted to do maintenance. But when it breaks, it's not like a node where you just spin another one up or have a backup just always sitting there ready to go. When it breaks, it's a monstrous, to me at least.
And fixing a partial history or a chain API is super fast and easy. It takes an hour if you have the slowest mapped mode of a node to get it up and running again, pretty much. And if you have a Hyperion Elastic Cluster crash, it can take days until it's up again. It's a very different thing.
Sure. So two main considerations we had the key consideration we had when we decided to move to bi-weekly cycle and have no overlapping technical evaluation periods is the exact same reason that now you can't have more than 16 hours downtime. But in case you do, you going forward don't get punished twice for it. So if it's within a technical evaluation period, it's gone, the penalty for it or the point loss is gone with the next tech evaluation. So that's one main consideration why the 2 weeks and why no overlapping evaluation periods anymore. But okay, it sounds good that we are not on the wrong track with the 95% on 2 hours and on 2 weeks. Should work. It can be adjusted in the future. So whenever we now start doing the new tech evaluations, please hand back some feedback if you think it's all right, or if we need to take any other precautious measures to avoid disasters. Also, I can recommend to revisit this this part of the discussion under this post and also below, which was actually very helpful. Ross recommendations for some parts of the guidelines, especially how the points for backups are structured and how much retention is needed. This all has found its way into the new guidelines. Probably I should have mentioned it earlier, but I'm doing it now. So we have an updated table for how backups are provided, how old the latest backup should be, retention for those backups, and the scores. And I think
that state history backup, that's not what I recommended. A full state history backup of 8 terabytes every month is a little bit crazy.
Yeah, it's not exactly the points you proposed, but like
not the points, but the backing up the state history every month, providing that's a bit crazy.
Okay, that's a good point.
That's because that's not what I said. I don't know if it can. I said every 6 months.
I'll mark it orange now.
Because I can tell you that the state history isn't even nearly, it's not important, right? I don't think anybody would actually use it. Mind you, I've used it in the past once, right? But the most important thing is a block log.
Mm-hmm.
Block log, I can get that once a month, but state history every month, that's just too much.
Okay. So I think the initial recommendation was 180 days from your side, right?
That's what I said. I don't know if anybody else has got an opinion here, but
yeah,
I think
any more opinions on this?
Because I can tell you for 0.25 points, I'm not going to be doing it.
Somebody is.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, 8 terabytes every 30 days.
I'm curious who will do that, because that's 8 terabytes to host it, 8 terabytes to provide it, 8 terabytes of download when somebody downloads it for 0.25. No, I'm good.
No way. Yeah. I've got it. I put it up every 6 months, and it's there. And anybody, if they really want it, it's available for them.
Would you do it?
Actually, Joseph, I think you took it one. Like,
yeah, more than once.
Yeah,
and
okay, so you're doing it. But I'm doing it every month.
Look at it from a
testing it, yeah, and it's very
look
useful.
at it from sorry.
Kiefer, yeah.
Look at it from a standby perspective. If you are a standby in a lower rank, 0.25 points means a couple of $100 more on your monthly income.
Mm-hmm. But for what purpose?
I get it, but I'll also say if you're that far down on the radar, I mean, kudos to you, fighting your way up. Ain't nobody going to have a clue that you're hosting state history backups to even, I mean, right now, we struggle to find who's hosting what where, but I get it. But yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you because where we run it and where I host it from, I copy it over the internet, 8 terabytes, just so big. I think, please just relook at that. 30 days is a little bit too much for that. 30 days for the block log, I'm with that. But yeah, let's don't make it 30 days for state history. I think that.
Would you do it though for 0.5 points?
I'm just thinking about it logistically though, it's not even about the points. It's just like, really?
That's where I'm like, oh.
That's where I'm at right now, points aside.
Okay. Anders.
Yeah, first I agree with Ross here, but on a second thing, it's good that people are providing all of the snapshots. It should exist. If one service is down, 2 are down, 3 are down, they still exist. However, I would argue at some point that you also need some bandwidth on those snapshot nodes, so you don't download them in 2 megabytes per second if it's the big block log or state history node. If you need a snapshot, fine, 2 megabit a second works. If you need a full block log, that's unusable. It will take almost as long as if you sync it, not really, but
I'll also say this is that I know we have a 1 gigabyte connection here, but there are people that download at 5 and 10 because it's going to the Canary Islands or it's going to Australia. So, I mean, it's really subjective. Even if, we don't have any throttling, but it just ain't fast all the time. So, that's a really subjective rating system. I get you. I also say, look, if you're going to suck on it, just keep sucking. I'm amazed at how subjective it is, even having a gigabit fiber enterprise, multiple connections, and people still complain that they can only get 510 megabit. And it takes a week to down. Ross, how long did I rip on you with 50 meg? I downloaded something and it was like a month. I ripped on him for a solid month at like 50 megabit.
And that's why most of my stuff I host up on these other nodes. Like if you pull down our Elasticsearch snapshot, you can literally get that whole thing down in 4 days, as long as you're not sitting on the end of an ISDN line somewhere, right? Just because it's got a gigabit link to the net there. So, and that's why I try and put these things up there, and it takes time to copy them up there from my little ISD in line.
So one question we had inside the OIG was, how can we incentivize to have proper state history backups across the network, possibly a few sources, but not have the whole network provide state history like mandatory, because it's just very costly, as you guys explained right now. So help us get to a number of state history backups a network like WAX should be providing.
Yeah, that's always the thing. We want to incentivize people to do it, but we also don't want everybody to do it because it doesn't make sense for everybody to have it. So we always find the middle ground so that it's viable for some, but not viable for everyone. And this is the same we do with a lot of things. We also at some time had the concept idea of saying we have a pool of points for something, and then the pool point is shared among everybody that participates. Like we have a pool for full history, and everybody that provides full history gets a share of the pools, and the more people provide full history, the fewer points are rewarded, and the other way around. But yeah, we put that on the back burner. I don't know if we will ever look at the idea again. It's sort of part of the concept we have with the idea of the workforces. But yeah, back to the question here. We need to find a middle ground. That's essentially what we're trying to achieve.
So I was thinking about something today, because you can actually configure the later versions of Node.js to do the blocks log and state history in these strides. They call them strides. I'm not sure, I haven't actually done it yet, Michael. I don't know if you've been fiddling with it, but is it possible to have a stride every million blocks or something?
It is actually.
And that way, sorry?
I was going to say, there's a team that's actually taken that to the next degree, and I was going to say it's something interesting to think about is, I mean, it takes a little finagling to line up the files, right? But if you generate files on a regular cut basis, yes, you can slice, dice, append, and kind of put them out there.
So if I go up and I've got, then I don't have to ever replace, 95% of the files. If somebody wanted to spin up a new blocks log, can they just copy those files and Node.js will automatically combine them itself? Or do you have to manually
back? But if you put them together, launch it with a snapshot that matches it, it's just like having one big block log that launches.
You see, now that
hopefully
that can suddenly make it easier.
Well,
that way, all of a sudden, I'm not copying 8 terabytes anymore. All I'm doing is
one more feature that they're working on. Imagine if they were torrents. Imagine if you weren't actually the only one hosting. Imagine if we were all shoving it down the pipe. There's a team that's actually taken that concept and starting to, not on wax yet, but that's why I say, it's funny you mentioned that, but two general concepts. Go back and recut up the logs, and then find a better way for us all to host this monstrous amount of data that never freaking changes 99.9%. It only appends on the end. But I will say there are some better maybe solutions that are being thunk up. But
okay, well,
I would say my vote. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and try the stride and see if I can use that as a valid mechanism. So I want to have multiple files, and I want to do a get block query and make sure it works. And that way it'll be a tick for me that it's actually working. Oh, I just haven't done it like that before.
You're striding block log, or are you striding state history, or are you striding?
Either or. Either or. So we'll start with the block log, right? It should work.
Get block on state history is the only reason I'd say. You said get block, and I'm like, don't forget state history uses it differently. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah. So whatever it is,
it gets very.
It's almost. It does. Huh?
State history log files get wonky and get corrupt, and it may not realize it. Anyway, I digress. But my vote would be, to answer what y'all are saying, have it optional, which I think you do. Maybe start at 0.25 just so people don't go crazy and start milking points right off the bat. But if nobody provides state history, you'll know why, and bump it up a little bit more. And then you'll start to see the people that at least do want to try. They'll find the threshold that'll make it worth their effort to host 8 terabytes of
I don't mind hosting it. I just don't like to update it all the time.
And I do
it's so
think
big.
180's a long time. Think about 6 months of state history synchronization on a node. That's a week in itself, plus 2 weeks. But I agree, it's better than the 3 months it took to get the rest of the files. So 180 days is really old, though. I mean,
Okay, then how about what's your best price? Come on, what's the best
90.
price?
90.
90 days.
The thing is, we just need to have the proper overlap. If we have 6 guilds providing them every 180 days, this means we could have a snapshot every month. So
valid.
it's all about the adjustment period.
Well,
I definitely throw it out there, see how it starts, but at least it's defined, and yeah, you'll find that name your price. But guess what? Spoiler: neither one of Ross or mine is that price. It sounds like.
But we could start with like 90 days, and then we have a couple. We can adjust it to like 60 days. No, I mean we can start with 60 days, then we can go to 90 days, and then we can go to 180 days until we have a shuffling system where everybody somehow has. So let's start with 60, Giannis. Let's start with 60. So we get the first...
wait a second. We already agreed on 90.
No, we start with 60,
I feel
and
like
then
I'm the only person hosting it. I'm the only person that this is bothering.
we start with 60, try to get more people in. We could start with 60 and 0.5 points, and then once we lured more people into providing it, we start to drop it to 90. And then we drop it to 180, and then when we drop it to 180, we drop it to 0.25 points.
Yeah. Okay. Sold. Now you can't change it now, right?
Yeah, the guidelines are final, but subject to short-lived changes.
Oh, you're adjusting the live guidelines, not the proposed for 5.4.
I'm reversing it right now.
No. Hey, wait, what are you doing?
We'll do it with 5.4, and we'll propose 5.4 next week. So that's the current plan. Next week we'll moving to 5.4, and then we'll adjust it to 0.5 points and 60 days. And then we'll extend this to 90 and then to 180. And once we hit 180, we'll adjust the score down again. And then we hopefully have multiple guilds providing state history in different intervals so that we always have something that's at least 30 to 45 days old.
All right, Michael, I don't really understand the question. Atomic points split out. What do you mean?
Ever does.
That's what I mentioned that on, I think it was a Guild's public channel. We talked about a month or two ago about removing Atomic API from the quality of life endpoints and moving it into its own category.
Okay.
So
so vital to the ecosystem.
Because it's so vital to the ecosystem. And then we talked about instead adding IBC to quality of life. It was a discussion last night on, I think, the Guild's channel. No, it was on the Antelope IBC channel.
Correct.
So we didn't discuss it internally in the OIG yet, but I definitely plan to propose it for 5.4.
Yeah. The main thing is, I do think Atomic API is important enough and gets smashed enough that it denotes its own points to not chew up other useful APIs that you might offer.
What are we doing with the points for Atomic Assets API?
Oh, they would just remain the same. I think it's currently 1, and it would remain at 1.
Mm-hmm.
But then IBC would add a potential bonus for everybody providing IBC.
Okay, so
and IBC providing IBC makes sense with the current push for the EOS-based USD, with the pool that's subsidized by WAX.
I'll happy to discuss with you guys. It's probably a side conversation about some of the details and what exactly does that entail. There's multiple chains. Is it a full node? Is it a light node? So anyway. spent months breaking their stuff along the way. So happy
Before
to
you
help.
keep editing 4.5.4, Giannis, we still made changes to 5.3 that didn't make it into this 5.4 version you're probably just editing. So probably make a new copy of 5.3, and then we will have to merge them together later on.
All right. I will do it right after the roundtable.
Just don't forget, Ross said 60 days for state history. That was his vote.
Wasn't it 90 days?
No, 60 and 0.5 points.
Yeah, all right.
just
So
messing with you.
you got me confused with all those numbers.
Go back and watch the recording. I think that's probably a great idea.
Or just restore the backup. You should have a backup there.
Undo.
Yeah, all right. I can restore it. Okay.
Imagine
yeah.
if you used Git for this.
It would be very nice because you can view updates, but imagine putting all of this into GitHub. It's certainly impossible. We would totally love to do it, but we will need to break up the structure into several parts. We can't really use tables on GitHub. So
You make me do it every month or 6 weeks. What's that about?
You have markdown tables, no?
yeah, you have markdown tables, but you can't have like the scoring tables we are having right now inside the guilds, for example. So the tables for the scoring we are using are with the multiplier and stuff. So those are pretty customized, and you can't really have dynamic tables in GitHub. So we can have a table with the details, but we can't like use the flow we are using here with points, multiplier weighted scores, and then a total score, which is based on this calculation. So since we are now introducing the decoupling of product and tech ops, it could be easier and it could be possible in some way. The ultimate goal is to bring this all to GitHub, but honestly, we don't know how to do this right now. And this here looks so much better than GitHub. It's just the look and feel of this page is something we can't recreate on GitHub. Not that easy. Or on the other side, I don't know if you guys like it, but going by a workflow like Git flow, developers of you are all aware of it. Something like Git flow, where we set up an initial table for you guys, and you guys fill out the table and submit it to us, and then we review it. That's the way the GitHub story could work. So no reports, but providing the whole table and the updates. So that's the way forward. Yeah, you can propose a score. Potentially, we will change it to a better score.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
Max.
But yeah, maxed, exactly.
Yeah,
just max. But yeah, but I mean, we don't see anything wrong with you guys proposing points for a product that you guys think is the right score for the product, and then debating with us.
And then we'll tell you why you're wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, that just seems right.
No, everybody. So every time we have somebody debating his points and they're proposing a score, I tell them to look at comparing products and see how they are valued and how they are evaluated. And then we can discuss why they're getting the score they get and why you're getting the score you get, and then we can try to find a middle ground. We always try to weight the ecosystem against each other with all contributions. So that's why I think proposing a score doesn't make much sense, but debating a score that was assigned does.
Right.
But it's also always important to look at the competing products and see what are they doing different. For once, to see what you could be doing different to earn more points, or if we are actually wrong. I mean, we're also just humans. We make mistakes, and sometimes we forget to apply a penalty or a decay, or sometimes there's just stuff that is not plainly written out in the reports we provide in our notes, why we're adding scores for something and why we don't. So we love feedback. We love talking about our work, and love being wrong and being corrected and trying to improve the situation.
I don't think you love being wrong. That's
No,
actually a lie.
I think that's the wrong wording.
Okay. So any feedback to the guidelines, and I think you guys will have a look at it in the next days when we release the preliminary scores, or read the guidelines carefully. Any feedback belongs into this thread here on GitHub, proposed guidelines 5.3. Just append your feedback here.
Yeah, one thing, sorry.
Yeah, if you have anything to add, that's the right moment before we move on.
Thing to the feedback. So what we saw with 5.3, we got not as much feedback as we would have hoped, but a lot of the feedback we got either through Telegram or on GitHub was not actually related to the changes from 5.3, but were general feedback that pertained the guidelines as they have been for the better part of the last couple of years. So this feedback is also always valued and great, but should rather be appended in your feedback submission when you do a submission, because there we also always have this feedback form where you can give feedback, or just in between. But if we ask for specific feedback, it would be great to just get feedback on this specific change or this specific topic, so that we can steer and control the discussions on one thing.
Right. So guys, get engaged wherever you can. Okay, the last point was we put it in short term because the observation came up today. Kefar actually started testing some chain APIs and found out an interesting thing about one particular chain API. Yeah, I think the issue we are seeing there is the chain API is up, chain API is running, all calls that we tried are going through, like get table rows and especially push transactions. But there was a certain issue with push transactions where the estimate for the transaction would vary just randomly. So having Kefar has more details on this probably. Can you explain for a short moment what those observations were for the estimate?
Yeah, the estimate was just that, so there's always a variation, and on some nodes the variation was bigger than on others. So while we know that the APIs node are usually a little bit slower than the producer nodes and also have more load than the producer nodes, we had variation of up to 4 times the estimated CPU load than what was actually needed. So Anders, I see Anders is raising his hand, so I'll let him talk in a second. Where Sweden was a good example for a stable service. So their estimates were always slightly higher than what actually needed, but that's fine. But the variance was very limited. There was a variance of 5 to 10% between each call. Then we had other guilds where the variance was between 5 and 400%. And this would lead to transactions fail that should not fail, simply because there was way more than enough CPU staked to the account, but the pushy API would just not let the transaction through because it says this will take like 200 milliseconds to execute, or I think it was 2.5 or something, when it actually only took 600 milliseconds, 600 microseconds. So yeah, Anders.
Yeah, I just wanted to explain why, even though mostly for the recording, if anyone is listening, it's because the CPU on the node that is receiving that push transaction is not fast enough, or as fast as the producer, or just below the producer. It will give a false number which doesn't represent what's in the block. And we and some other teams have been arguing that people should be running their push API nodes, those that are receiving transactions on a CPU that is as fast as the producer or just below it, and don't have some overclock like the OC stuff that gives the wrong wrong on the other direction, but the same configuration as the BP, to ensure that the initial billing of the example billing of the transaction is actually as close to legit as possible, as it will be on the producer, most likely be on producer because it can differ as well, or just above.
So, talking of the exact guild where we made this observation, they are active on testnet right now. It seems that the testnet producer is running very fast. So the issue here is that the API node is a so-called potato node and the producer is not. Or the other way around.
Or are those on mainnet?
The push was on mainnet.
Ah, the push.
Okay,
sorry.
Push was on mainnet. Yeah.
I did a mistake.
Would assume in their case they're also running the same infrastructure on mainnet. They're running on testnet, at least for the producer nodes.
Correct. I'd say that's probably a 13th gen i9 that they threw at it. So they got a nice fast API or BP. But Anders, we had this conversation right before you joined, actually. That was my statement, was that normally it's a potato that just can't keep up that tends to cause it. But there were other points brought up that there are some other occurrences that can be occurring, the load of the server, dealing with other things, this, that, and the other, to cause some additional skewing. But the end result's still the same. You want to try to provide a consistent experience. But yeah, they happen to have really fast BP numbers, and if the same mainnet is compared to their mainnet API, there's a dramatic difference between what would be billed versus what would get reported. I also think it could start triggering subjective billing problems, because all of a sudden you'll start overbilling, which would mean that accounts would get flagged for failing CPU subjectively and start getting nuked in processing on the node, because it's kind of a ripple effect. That when you overbill, it may have a long-term effect.
Yeah, that's one thing I ran into significantly, because the transaction would fail because I knew this transaction takes around 20 milliseconds, but the API node would assume it takes 30, and then it would deny it because he said, I can't do it in 25, so you're not getting it through. And then it would deny this like a couple times. And then it would say, I don't have enough CPU, because it would cut me out because of subjective billing, because I had too many failed transactions.
Correct. Then you were zeros all the time, and then you were screwed. That's why I was like, interesting. When you overbill, because now we've all got to run subjective billing, or tend to.
And if this happens on Cloud Wallet, you're fucked, because you then have to wait like 6 hours because you can't change your endpoint. You're set on this endpoint. So
I didn't realize that, but yeah.
I think there are still a lot of teams that don't separate push requests, like push transactions, and the queries from different nodes. Because if a node gets a lot of queries and a lot of transactions that should be pushed on chain, it might not have time to deal with everything properly during high load periods. And those should probably be different ones.
It should be, and they're getting better in the 5.0 stack about the read-only windows, the write windows, the different threads. Although that said, at least at this level, you have to have like a Ouija level understanding to truly even get close to effectively setting up nodes to properly handle read windows, write windows, routing via the HA proxy to dedicated nodes, obviously. But there will be some inherent fixes to the nodes themselves. But yeah, I mean, until you start truly having one abuser not impact the K for testing of transactions, it's always going to be tough.
Okay, so is there any sense for or any way for us to test those API nodes which makes sense? Like from the push transaction perspective, and that you get billed what is expected to get billed?
Yes, it's actually pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did today. I just took a transaction I knew would fail because I didn't have enough CPU. And then I just collected the estimate the API returned me.
Okay.
So in that way, I could check the performance of each API node. So I did this like 3 times, and then I switched the API node, took the next 3 values of the next API node, and then I took the next, and I did this for 5 or 6 nodes just to check how is the variance. And then by occasion, I ended up staying on one, and this one then kept failing me all my other transactions when I wasn't testing anymore. And that's when I realized, oh, there's a bit more of a problem.
Nice. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, obviously you can only do so many so frequent, you definitely don't want to get banned just naturally. But like we found on our testing nodes is you need to get a bigger base sample because there's so much variation to, I mean, even to the point now, if one of the bot farms is on or off, that can dramatically change the available CPU. And I mean, that thing's calculated like every block or something, isn't it? So you could dramatically see some skewing. And then there's that rogue issue where we don't know why, but some transactions just overbill. I think Aaron at Greymass has spent years chasing that gremlin, but sometimes they just go a little wonky. So the more data points you can get, just like testing things over the internet, I definitely think the more you can try to depend upon that variation of number, right? But not only 3 points, but I'm sure you're thinking more than just 3 points. But
yeah,
good indicator. And you have to test it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Get more than 3 points and then do it multiple times a day, like once an hour, get 3 data points once an hour, and do this for every guild. And that way you're probably not getting banned. And then you can just do it.
And then look for a variance in the range of how much the transaction costs, right?
Yeah.
Twofold, how much their variance occurs, and then how much it varies against, call it the global average or expectation or whatever.
Okay.
On processing, again, completely separate mostly from the actual billing that occurs on the BPs, right? Because that's a whole different number. Should be the same, close, but it's technically not.
No, but I could get that number and compare it as well, and we could compare the estimate with what actually happened if we have a lot of those transactions for each BP, and I already got the script for that, so.
It'd be good for it, but like if you take an API that's going to process it, like our i9s, right? Our 10th gen i9s are 2.2. Well, if you go and compare that to what the Wizard Guild 19th or 13th gen cited at, it's twice the speed.
Yeah, but compare it from the same team, like our APIs to our BP.
You can compare it that way, but for the sake of the argument, 20 of the 21 rounds aren't my BP. So it's more likely that it's not my block producer that it needs to match. It's the average of everybody else, which goes back to why we bring up that issue about this wide variation. Sorry, I know you got to go. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it is. Sure. And I've held all of you way too long in this call. Initially, we planned to have it all done in 1 hour. Obviously, we are taking so much longer.
We have to improve that.
Yeah, to get to the agenda. Not sure how we are going to achieve it. Maybe we are going to have a call once a week.
Raise your hand.
Basel, yeah?
Yeah, I just joined the call recently, but I don't know if you have discussed this point. I don't know if you need to discuss it, actually. If you check the price in Oracle for each node or for each producer. You can find so many different between, for example, Wax, Sweden, or ours, or another guild. Some guilds uses 4 digits for price, for example. Some use 3 digits. So shall we do or set any standard for that, or that's?
I think the contract actually handles this. There's some kind of average between the different guilds. I don't think 3 or 4 digits.
I don't think the contract handled it. I don't think that.
Yeah, actually, the contract should do the average from the whole feed that all guilds do. So basically, if we have Wax P to USD conversion, and for example, 10 teams push that to from different sources, it gets average from 10 prices if they are different.
Okay, sure. We will. So, I'm taking notes. We will need to
just
discuss this.
to set the standard, not something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks for the feedback, Basil. And also Benjamin, and after this we are closing the roundtable. So Ben?
Hey. Yeah, we were talking about the length of the call.
Yeah.
I think, you mentioned maybe weekly. I think could be a good idea. I think it's just good to hear from everyone once in a while, and we have need to connect and discuss things, and maybe it doesn't have to be this formal every week. Maybe it doesn't have to be recorded every week. It's just good to hang out and talk anyway. So
I think that's a nice idea that we have like every 2 weeks a call with a fixed agenda, and in between it's just an open roundtable, and whoever has time and has the need to talk can join.
Yeah,
and
that's what I was thinking.
Okay. Basil, is your hand still up or up again?
Sorry, I forget because I'm driving the car. Sorry, guys.
Sure. Then thanks everyone for this wonderful roundtable today. Really enjoyed the feedback. We are taking this into office and preparing the 5.4 guidelines. We are in the middle of evaluations, so we need to hurry now and work on our guilds. So let's close up the roundtable for today. And once again, thanks everyone for joining.